Hello everyone, this is part 14 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Yoshihiro smirked as he watched Hinata settle into the seemingly traditional Hyuga taijutsu stance. He did notice some slight differences between her stance and the normal Hyuga stance, having fought dozens of Hyuga during the war. Bastards had been a real pain in the ass and had devastated many squads during the opening days of the conflict. The Tsuchikage smirked as the girl's steady pale gaze settled onto his own eyes. Oh, he knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to read him, toy with his mind as most Hyugas did before and during the fight. Hit your confidence before they take you down completely and permanently. Hinata, however, found herself very surprised. The only thing she could see within the man before her was confidence and a strange sort of contentedness in his eyes. Always, no matter who her opponents were, in a life or death situation there was always the tiniest hint of fear. But in this one he showed no such thing. She could even say that he was excited about this. It was quite disconcerting to see such a thing. Yoshihiro's smirk widened as he watched the girl tense a little more. Of course he felt fear, every warrior did, it was human nature no matter who you were. There would always be that tiny little fear in the back of your mind, but his years in the war had served him well. When they had discovered the Hyuga's ability to read someone so well, almost all ninja were required to take a crash course on masking their emotions and feelings from them. It hadn't made any huge impact against the stronger of the Hyuga, but it did increase the survival rate of their nins. After the war was over he had continued to study how to mask his emotions. One of the best was to put up a front. You use 1, 2, 3, dozens, maybe even hundreds of different emotions to mask the one you do not want any to see. He was one of the few remaining ninja in Iwa alive who still knew how to do it. Shame really. It was a useful tool even against non-Hyuga. Before any words could be said, Yoshihiro dashed forward, rushing the girl as he let out a battle cry, his hammer held in a ready position as he leaped high into the air, raising the heavy weapon over his head as he fell towards her, swinging his hammer to bring it down on her head. Before it made contact, the clan head leaped back, avoiding the weapon as it hit the floor before she rushed forward, delivering 3 quick strikes to Yoshihiro's chest armor, making the man stumble back. As she moved to deliver the 4th strike, Yoshihiro caught her wrist, smirking before he tossed her over his shoulder, intending to slam her into the floor, only to have Hinata right herself in mid-air so she landed on her feet. She caught Yoshihiro's slightly surprised gaze before she leaped up, delivering a solid knee strike to the man's face. She cursed as she forgot to add chakra to that attack but made up for it as she delivered 4 more strikes to the man's chest. He should be having some trouble breathing at this point. Landing on her feet, she turned and watched as Yoshihiro struggled to stand. Coughing up blood, the old man gripped his chest as he stood. Damn. How the hell could a kid like you be this strong? Even I can't be this old. Hinata again settled herself in her taijutsu stance. I'm afraid you are. Now. You are in my field of divination, she exclaimed before the veins around her eyes bulged as she activated the legendary Byakugan bloodline. Moving at incredible speed, she was upon the older man before he even knew it. 2 palms, she cried out, striking him twice in the chest. 4 palms, 4 more strikes to the upper arm. 8 palms, 8 strikes to the lower arms and hands. 16 palms, 16 strikes to the hips and knees. 32 palms, 32 strikes to the stomach and pelvic area. 64 palms, 62 strikes to the chest. 128 palms. She yelled as she prepared to deliver the final kata, which would hit each and every one of the tenketsu of his chakra system throughout his body. As she did so, however, she missed the old man's smirk. Something she immediately regretted as the Tsuchikage suddenly lashed out with his hammer, too quickly for her to react as he delivered 3 quick strikes to her left arm, shattering nearly every bone through the length of her limb. Screaming in raw pain as the burning agony raced up and down her arm, Hinata still had enough sense of mind to leap back, away from the older man and nearer to Shino, who was now trying to stand back up, seeing as how his teammate and fellow clan head was now in as much trouble as he was. Wow, how. She gasped out as best she could as she struggled not to throw up from the sheer pain in her arm as blood began to seep through the white cloth of her battle robe. How I wasn't affected by your hack, Yoshihiro completed for her as he smirked. Simple. Don't you remember at the very start of our fight, when you rescued the bug user over there? My armor glowed green girly. He smiled. That was me activating the special seals this armor has. I designed it myself. We Shimazu have always been prided as armor and weapon makers. Using some special chakra techniques and some seals of our own design, I made this armor to protect, at least partially, from all chakra absorbing and chakra based techniques. It would take a decent amount of chakra for a non-elemental chakra to affect me through this armor. Your clan taijutsu uses so little chakra I can barely feel it on my skin. Do you mean to tell me that you haven't been affected by any of my attacks from the start? Hinata gasped out, breathing heavily. That's right, I wanted to get you overconfident, sure of your victory in order to give me the chance to get a quick strike that would make this a relatively easy for me. But, the blood. This, Yoshihiro said, reaching into his mouth, pulling out a small plastic object, clearly torn open and clearly having held blood at one point. Great for making the enemy think you're down and out. Hinata's eyes narrowed in anger. Fooled by such a simple trick. She should have focused more, seen the state of his lungs and heart before she attacked. But indeed she had let down her guard and now she was paying for it. Shino stood up, biting back a groan of pain as he felt his broken ribs scrape against each other. An nauseating feeling churned his stomach and fire spread across his chest. He would have to be careful. If one of those ribs punctured a lung, the chances were very slim that he would be able to get to a competent medic in time, especially here in the field. Yoshihiro's smirk widened as he watched Shino struggle to get to the girl's side. Hey, you two sure could be great. With a bit more experience you could have beaten me. But you were still wet behind the ears. He hefted his hammer, and rushed them. Shino formed his Kikaichu into wings again before he lifted Hinata up to the sky. Stopping mid-charge, Yoshihiro looked up as Shino spun around before he threw Hinata towards him. The girl, in mid-accent, had tied some ninja wire around her to keep her broken arm from moving as it pinned it to her body. Yoshihiro's stance tightened, preparing for whatever attack she could deliver. At the last possible second, Hinata started spinning rapidly in mid-air. Yoshihiro's eyes widened in momentary shock before he grabbed the earth in front of him and with a heave pulled it upwards, forming a foot-thick earth wall. Kaiten. The young girl yelled as the spinning vortex of chakra formed around her, smashing against the earth wall, creating a mass dust cloud. Yoshihiro's form could be seen as he leapt up, over the debris. His hammer strapped to his back, the man formed his hand seals. Holding out his two hands as if he was gripping a large ball. Slowly stones and pieces of rock gathered there in a tight ball before flames consumed it, dancing across the hard shell. Insei no Hamatsu, he yelled before he threw the fireball down towards his previous position. Creating yet another explosion which shook the area around them with its intensity. A small crash was heard before Hinata flew out of the dust cloud, her clothes singed and burnt in several places, a nasty gash across her forehead as she skidded across the floor. Yoshihiro smirked, but it quickly died as he heard a faint buzzing sound. Craning his neck behind him, he caught sight of Shino as the younger ninja dived towards him in a free fall. The Kikaichu forming on his arms, forming the praying mantis-like limbs again. Yoshihiro cursed. There was no way he would be able to dodge in mid-air. Shino fought his way through the haze of pain and the burning in his chest as he plunged the two blade-like extensions into Yoshihiro's back, going completely through and through, puncturing the older man's left lung and his stomach. His Kikaichu crawled all over the man's armor like ants on a lion as they worked to eat up his chakra as quickly as possible. Shino would have sighed in relief if only he hadn't caught Yoshihiro's smirk. He went to pull back, but before he could, the older man delivered a brutal elbow into the younger boy's chest. If Shino thought he had felt pain before, it was absolutely nothing compared to the agony he felt flaring across his body now. The pain was dizzying. His vision swam before he felt another impact, barely registered in his pain-clouded mind. As his Kikaichu dispersed and he began his free fall back down towards the earth, he saw the Yoshihiro he had just stabbed crumble to dust. Another mud clone. He thought before he hit the floor headfirst with a sickening crack. Shino. Hinata gasped worriedly as she struggled to stand. Another crack to her right drew her attention back to the dust cloud as it began to settle, revealing an earth dome as it slowly crumbled, revealing the real Yoshihiro, and at once Hinata realized what had happened. He had formed the first earth wall to stop her attack, then he had formed a clone to leap out, knowing that Shino was still hovering above them. Then when the clone had used that explosive attack, he had formed the dome in order to protect himself from his own attack and stay in the dust cloud. She hadn't noticed because the chitin had momentarily blinded her, as well as the follow-up attack he had delivered with the clone. You two are really very good, Yoshihiro said as he walked out of the crumbling dome. Looking at Hinata's angry face, he sighed. Don't get mad, kid. Like I said, I'm just more experienced than you, and with that comes a few more tricks up my sleeve than what you got. Hinata glared heatedly at him. Yoshihiro moved to shift his hammer back into a fighting stance when he suddenly turned and caught a kunai between his fingers. Looking to the rooftops, both Hinata and Yoshihiro caught sight of Lee and Tenten. Yoshihiro looked at the kunai in his hand before he tossed it back to Tenten. Not bad, but like these two you're still wet behind the ears. Tenten caught the kunai before she and Lee leapt down, placing themselves between Hinata and Shino. Yoshihiro moved to settle himself back into his fighting stance when there was an explosion that rocked the second wall of the city they were currently laying siege to. That would be the rest of the Iwa nins arriving now. Yoshihiro spoke before he looked to the 4 Konoha nins. I suggest you pull your men back. There's been enough fighting and death for one day. The older man strapped his hammer onto his back before he turned and began leaving the courtyard. Wait, Tenten called behind him. What is this? You're just gonna walk away. That's simple. Yoshihiro craned his neck back to look at her from the corner of his eyes before he snorted. Wet behind the ears. He sighed before he yelled loud enough for her to hear. Go home, kids. Tomorrow's another day. Why? Tenten called but was cut off as Lee placed his hand on her shoulder to hold her back. She watched him shake his head before he moved to pick up Shino. She looked back to Yoshihiro's retreating form before she sheathed her weapons and went to help the injured Hinata. Later that night, Sakai, Iwa encampment. The merry cheering of dozens of Iwa nins could be heard as they all gathered around several bonfires around the main courtyard of the city. Music was playing from the side, to which some of the ninja and kunoiki danced too. Yoshihiro sat cross-legged a few feet away from the fire as his men laughed, ate and drank around him in celebration of their victory. While the casualties to the resident militia had been relatively high, as well as the casualties to the minuscule nin force of the city, they had managed to deal a heavy blow to the Konoha nins, in morale at least. 2 of their commanding officers were utterly defeated by him, single-handedly, and had been forced to retreat with the arrival of the main Iwa forces. Indeed, morale in his camp had skyrocketed. My lord, a voice drew him away from his musings. Looking off to his right, he found a somewhat tipsy ninja as he raised his wine jug up high. A toast, he yelled over the crowd. To Yoshihiro-sama, the greatest Tsuchikage to ever lead us into battle. Cheers of agreement were heard before the music and dance began anew, as well as the celebration. Yoshihiro chuckled lightly at the younger man's praise before he drank from his own bottle. Still, he was no fool. Those kids were good, but like he had said, they were wet behind the ears. The boy, Naruto, would soon send other, more experienced ninja against him. And they would not be so easy to defeat. They may even force him to use his clan's special ability. He was brought out of his thoughts as a somewhat panicked voice reached his ears. Looking to his left, he found a young Chunin, probably no older than 15, running through the crowd towards him. As he reached him, Yoshihiro held up a hand. Calm down, boy, catch your breath and tell me what's wrong, he said before he took a quick drink. The young man took a deep breath and calmed himself as best he could before he spoke. Yoshihiro-sama, at the gates, 7 Rouge nins have come stating that they wish to meet you in private. It's probably one of those Konoha fools trying to play a trick on us. One of the Chunin spoke up before he bowed to Yoshihiro. My lord, allow me to kill them now so they trouble you no longer, the man said with a humble lowering of his head. Yoshihiro waved his hand as he stood. No, I'll go see what they want. Besides, if it's a fight they want, well, I really wouldn't want to disappoint them. But my lord, some of the men cried in protest. Bah, I'm not that old yet, kids, he said, waving his hand in dismissal of their worries before he made his way to the gate. When he arrived, he found 7 ninjas, each in brown hooded cloaks, along with 4 large wolf-like dogs, bowing as several of his Iwa Anbu stood around them. His heavy footsteps rang methodically throughout the courtyard before he stopped in front of the 7 nins. "Speak," he commanded. The one in the front unrolled a scroll before him. His men tensed and gripped their weapons, expecting some form of trap. When the scroll unrolled, however, there was just the seal of the Kazekage at the bottom of the unrolled scroll. Yoshihiro looked at the unrolled scroll at his feet and looked to the bowed, now identified Suna Nin. "What's this?" A strong, sure female voice rang out from the one that had unrolled the scroll. "The Kazekage has sent us to provide assistance to you. We are all of Junin rank and are competent in field combat, stealth, and scouting. We are willing to serve you loyally until the duration of this mission in exchange for your silence of our participation in this battle." Yoshihiro smirked. So Suna doesn't want to put its foot down, lest it step in a great pile of crap, eh? Silence. Yoshihiro chuckled, amused by these old tactics before he stepped forward. Pulling back their hoods, it revealed a girl with pink hair, a kid with some red markings on his cheeks, another girl with similar markings, a pale blonde-haired girl with blue eyes, a large boy with swirls on his cheeks, a scared regular-looking kid, and finally a blonde girl with 4 pigtails. Looking over each of the nins, a smirk grew on his lips before a low chuckle escaped his lips. Eventually his chuckle turned into roars of uproarious laughter. The young group of Suna nins each glanced at each other somewhat nervously before his laughter died down. Smirking down on them, he rolled up the scroll before holding it up for them to see. Then with a small flare of chakra, the scroll was consumed in flames before he threw it down to the floor. The smirk still firmly on his lips as he looked each of them over one more time. "Welcome to Sakai, brats." He chuckled again before he turned and left. 3 days later, Konohagakure no Sato. Naruto sat in his office, Guan and Ginchiko standing before him. They were giving their monthly report over the economic, military, and political situations in Kiri. So far everything was going as it usually did, except for a few minor economic drawbacks. Nothing was out of the ordinary. Naruto placed the file down onto the desk as he looked at Ginchiko and Guan. The two had not changed much over the years. Ginchiko's short cropped hair had grown out some, now reaching her shoulders, but apart from that little else had changed. The same with Guan, the man's long beard had grown longer, as well as a few battle scars that adorned his uncovered right arm. Naruto did have to admit, however, that these two had become some of his more valuable generals in times of war. They had proved themselves time and time again, saving others like Kakashi and even Jiraiya himself on one occasion. He nodded to the pair. "Very well, you may stay in Konoha today. Tomorrow you may return to Kiri at your leisure. Once you arrive, you are too." The door to his office burst open, revealing a Chunin messenger who bowed as he quickly handed him a sealed scroll. Naruto broke the wax seal over the scroll and unrolled it, allowing his eyes to travel over the contents within. They narrowed in annoyance and anger before he set the scroll down. A slightly contemplative look entered his eyes before he looked to the messenger. "Bring me Hatake Kakashi." The man bowed before he hastily left the room. Naruto then looked to Guan and Ginchiko. There has been a slight change of plan. Tentenli and Hinata, whose wounded arm was currently wrapped from wrist to shoulder in bandages, stood inside of the medic's tent looking over an unconscious Shino. The medic had reported that he had a concussion, most likely due to the fall, 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung because of them, as well as some internal bleeding along his abdominal region. Overall, the situation was not pretty. 2 others stood in the room, Guan's apprentice Mika, and the man's adopted son Tushiro. Mika had changed little over the years, pale silver hair still hung freely reaching her lower back, red eyes gleaming with veiled madness. She had changed her blue clothing and now wore much darker clothes. A long-sleeved black shirt with a high collar and black pants that accented her figure nicely. Her Kiri forehead protector with a purple cloth was used as a belt. Tushiro was a young man about their age, a beard which reminded Shino and Hinata of one currently comatose Sarutobi Asuma decorated his face. Strapped to his sides were 2 single-handed tomahawk-style axes as well as several sealing scrolls. The two had arrived shortly after Shino and Hinata's defeat at the hands of the Tsuchikage and had helped in assaulting and holding off the Iwa nins from that point out as the two healed. All assaults they had launched against the city walls each ended in failure. The Tsuchikage always brought his men back from the brink of defeat. Also, some reports from the battlefield were somewhat disturbing. Apparently there were ninja on the field that had been seen using techniques native to Konoha and their clans. Still, the reply that had come back from Konoha after their request for reinforcements was an uplift. Naruto would be sending Guan and Kakashi as reinforcements in order to deal with Yoshihiro, leaving Tenten, Lee, Tushiro, Mika and Hinata, if she felt up to it, to lead the army in its attack relatively unhindered. With two veterans and skilled nins like Hatake and Guan coming to their aid, morale among the Konoha nins remained relatively high in spite of their failure to take the merchant city of Sakai. Why not? Was the cry of anger from one Kumo Kunoiki named Akina as she glared at her sensei and leader, the Raikage. Angry Sapphire clashed with emotionless Onyx. In a steady, even voice, the Raikage replied, "It's not time yet, Akina. That's what you've been saying since this whole thing started. When will this elusive time of yours coming?" She questioned, her voice coming out as a low growl of agitation and frustration as her eyes tinted red at the edges. Tsunade, who was also in the room, tensed slightly at the feel of the Kyuubi's chakra. Though she trusted Akina, the subject of Naruto had always been a delicate one around the girl. Like carrying a lit match in a room full of gunpowder. Juge calmly served himself some tea from the kettle before he spoke. "I have made my decision, Akina. The subject is closed. He's already attacked Iwa. If we attack him now, he'll have to deal with two of the hidden villages at once, and once Suna sees him losing, they'll undoubtedly join in too. Why the hell are you holding back like this, senpai?" she questioned as her eyes gave into the red creeping into them. Juge stood and with a flare of his chakra spoke in a tone that left no room for argument whatsoever. "I said the conversation is closed, and that's final, Akina." The girl stepped back slightly, the sight of her sensei's normally emotionless features tight with restrained anger startling her for a moment. She opened her mouth as if to speak again, but instead let out a sound of frustration and stormed out the room. With a sigh, Juge fell back to his chair, rubbing his forehead to stave off a coming headache. Tsunade walked and sat down on the chair in front of his desk and spoke. "I must admit, I too am beginning to wonder just when this right time of yours is coming, or if it's here and you just haven't noticed yet." Juge sighed and spoke. Yoshihiro Shimazu, despite his age, is far above the skills of almost all of Naruto's retainers, except perhaps Jiraiya. Suna has also lent their assistance, however discreetly, to him as well. What will happen is simple: Yoshihiro will defeat all that Naruto sends after him. At that point, Naruto himself will grow frustrated and march onto Iwa itself, leaving Konoha relatively open to attack. That is when we will strike. Aren't you placing too much faith in this Tsuchikage, Juge? He could always fail, even you don't know everything. Juge nodded. "I realize that, which is why I have a backup plan in case the unlikely scenario that Yoshihiro is defeated comes into play," he stated calmly. Tsunade sighed and shook her head. "Wouldn't it be easier to simply tell her that rather than your cryptic when the time is right routine? She deserves to know at least what you're planning." Juge shook his head. While her insistence on the matter would no doubt drop if I told her, she is impetuous and reckless, especially when it concerns anything involving Naruto. The older woman shook her head and sighed. "Sometimes, Juge, sometimes I wonder if you're worse than he is with how coldly you manipulate those under you. The ends justify the means, Tsunade." He spoke as he took a sip of his tea. "That's what he would say, Liang." She spoke over her shoulder before she left the room, leaving the Raikage to his own devices. Yugito watched from a distance as Akina pounded away at a training post, using kicks and punches in a near-wild display. Blue chakra covered her fists along with the occasional wisps of red as she punched the post again and again. Cracks began to form along the post, as slivers dug into her flesh, allowing thin trails of blood to flow down her fists and legs. She ignored these, however, and instead focused on releasing her pent-up frustrations on the hapless wood. With a cry of rage and pent-up emotions, she delivered one last devastating, chakra-enhanced blow which shattered the log into hundreds of wooden slivers. Panting, the young blue-eyed Jinchuriki barely noticed her feline-containing counterpart as she approached, a somewhat somber expression on her face. As she spoke, her eyes carried a hint of pity. "Feel better now?" Akina let out a huff before she fell back onto the soft grass, her form spread out as she breathed somewhat heavily from the exertion. Yugito watched her younger friend for a moment before she sat down at her side and took her injured, tender hand into her own. She spoke as she began to pull the slivers out. "I know that this must be very frustrating for you, Akina. But you should have faith in Sensei. The younger girl pulled her hand away from the other girl's grasp as she sat up. This isn't fair, Yugito. We've trained so long and so hard for a chance to take him down, and now that we have the perfect chance to do that, it's like he's holding us back. Yogito embraced the younger girl in a comforting hug as she ran her hands through her hair. You know, sensei's never let us down before, he won't start now. Just have a little faith in him, Akina. Akina sighed in reluctant acceptance as she nodded. I guess you're right, Yugi. It'll be alright, Akina, soon, very soon. Yoshihiro silently walked along the first wall of the city, his men saluting or bowing in respect as he passed them by. He nodded or grunted in return. While others would fret over his age and health, he didn't really care. He enjoyed walking among his men, inspecting the defenses and overall readiness of them, something that others would call grunt's work. He enjoyed it immensely, it let him forget about the troubles of being a cage for a few minutes, and it also brought back memories of glory, and victory in his younger years during the first great shinobi war. He had been only a genin at the time, but he had learned quickly. Kinda had to in those days. Then again when he was head of the Special Defense Squad during the Second Great War against Konoha. He had fought against the supposed god of shinobi, the Professor and Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi, and had won. Not to say he hadn't come out without a scratch, far from it actually, but he had nonetheless won and stopped Konoha from proceeding on to Iwa. Had it not been for Namikaze Minato, who had come to his cage's rescue, he may have even succeeded in killing the old Sandaime. It was that victory that had bought enough time for their Yondaime Tsuchikage, Nobunaga Oda, to arrive and turn the tides of the battle. They had then pushed Konoha back all the way to their own territory and even farther. After that was when Minato invented that technique, the Hiraishin, and had turned the tides yet again, eventually killing Nobunaga and forcing Iwa's surrender. It was those two victories, his victory against the Sandaime and Minato's victory against Nobunaga, that had gotten them both nominated, and eventually accepted as the cages of their respective villages. He had met the boy during a Chunin exam again, about a month before the Kyuubi attack he had sacrificed himself to stop. He could honestly say the boy had impressed him, something not easily done outside of battle. The sheer force of character and charisma the young cage practically exhumed spoke volumes of what he could have become. If Minato was still alive, Yoshihiro would most likely have done everything within his power to improve relations with Konoha and form an alliance, despite the resistance he would undoubtedly be met with by his own ninja. Still, those dreams were in the past, Minato was dead and he was too tired to plow through the red tape, the bureaucratic bullshit and politics to secure an alliance. If this world wanted to join him in hell, it was welcome too. He'd be heading there soon anyway. He held back a cough as he punched his chest to alleviate the sudden pain. Looking off to the side, his eyes caught the form of that Suna girl, Temari she said her name was if he recalled correctly. She stood on one of the many guard towers, her hair and black clothing fluttering in the harsh winds caused by the high tower. The light of the pale moon fell from the heavens, and for a moment, she seemed to glow with this light, and Yoshihiro couldn't help but be impressed by her beauty. He knew that any of the youngsters who ended up with her would certainly be considered one lucky individual. Looking at her more closely, however, he found a tenseness on her, one he recognized easily. It was a mixture of fear, anxiety, excitement and impatience. It happened to many who would be entering their first battle, but most of the men he had brought with him were seasoned veterans. They knew how to keep their heads cool when shit went to hell. This kind of attitude was that of a rookie Chunin, not a Junin as her rank classified her. Unless, of course, she knows something. Not one that enjoyed being left out of the loop. The old Tsuchikage began making his way to the tower. Nodding to the guard that saluted as he approached, he went on through and up the stairs. Temari watched the city on the outside of the wall, or what was left of it. She felt somewhat bad for those who had their homes there, outside the city gates that is. Sakai had grown so much there was just no room within the walls, and so they had been forced to expand outside of them, seeing as how the ground behind it was too loose, too unstable to make proper foundations for buildings. They had been forced to make them in front of the walls where they were exposed to attacks by others, and any who weren't quick enough to get behind the wall before its massive 20-foot iron gate slammed shut would be left outside at the mercy of their enemies. A voice suddenly spoke up behind her, causing her to jump slightly. "Ya know any ninja with a good throwing arm, and enough accuracy could take you out with ease, standing there so openly?" As she spun around, her eyes came upon the form of one Yoshihiro Shimazu. Sighing somewhat in relief, and in order to rein in her temper at being snuck up on, she bowed. My apologies, Yoshihiro-sama, I was merely thinking. Cut the formalities, brat, I'm not in the mood and I can tell you're not either. He said as he sat down on one of the nearby benches. Temari's eyebrow twitched with mild irritation at the man's dismissal of her formality, something she rarely did, and whenever she did one had better appreciate it. Nevertheless, she straightened and looked back to the city. It's nothing really, she assured as she turned her back to the man. Come on now, girl, don't give me that crap, it's late and these old bones are tired. He said as he stood up and walked to her side. Temari sighed. While she wasn't particularly fond of discussing her problems with what was in essence a total stranger, she didn't want to also bear down her own friends, who had enough on their minds as it was. Besides, he had asked, so she supposed it was all right for him to listen. I had a dream, or a nightmare really. She leaned onto the stone as she sighed. I saw him, standing over a battlefield, dead were everywhere, the smell of blood was so thick. All of my friends, my brothers, even my sensei, they were all dead at his feet, and I could see the Kazekage monument crumbling behind him as the village was lit on fire. The screams were horrible. Yeah, he sighed. The screams are always the worst really. They stay in your head longer. Turning to look at her from the corner of his eye, he raised an eyebrow in silent question before he spoke. Still, this is interesting. I assume you're talking about this Hokage, Uzumaki Naruto. You never mentioned you'd met him before. Temari sighed. Once, about 10 years ago during the Suna-Oto invasion attempt. Ah yeah, I heard about that. I assume you met him during the attack then. She shook her head. Met would not be the right word, I suppose. But yeah, she sighed as she turned and leaned her back against the stones. He certainly leaves an impression. Yoshihiro snorted with a smirk on his face. Right, I assume the so-called Devil King would be impressive on the battlefield. The Devil King? She questioned with a slightly raised eyebrow. It's what some of the men started calling him after he beat Kusarame and Taki. The name just sort of stuck, I suppose. He shrugged. Temari nodded before she sighed and looked up to the stars. I hate dreams, she muttered, allowing Yoshihiro to smirk again. Life is nothing but a dream, kid. He then joined her as she gazed up to the stars. We just need to be bold and live it. Hinata, Lee, Tenten, Mika and Toshiro stood in one of the many tents of the camp. On the floor of this one was a map of the city they were to besiege. Because Shino was the commander, and was disabled, it fell to her to finalize the battle preparations, seeing as how she was the second in command. She sighed. While it was the first time she had led a battle on her own, she had seen Naruto, Guan, Kakashi and even Jiraiya enough times to know how to do it. Lee, Toshiro. She spoke firmly, catching the taijutsu masters and the Kirinin's attention as she used a stick to mark an area on the map. I want you two to take your men and focus your assault on the far northern part of the wall. It's received the most amount of structural damage due to our constant attacks from what the scouts report. You two are to push and batter that wall as hard as you possibly can. I want the enemy to start focusing their attention there by the time Tenten's unit and mine advance. Once you think you've drawn enough of the enemy's attention towards you, give a signal to us. My unit will then advance along to the main gate, drawing their attention again. By that time the forces along the southern end of the wall should be spread fairly thin. Mika, Tenten. She nodded to the other two women. You two are to push your attack there. Tenten, your unit is the best at long-range support. You are to gain the high ground of the defense towers, commandeer them one by one and then use them to help our men. Mika, your unit is the best as hit-and-run strike tactics. You are to be the ones to deliver the initial strike, and breach the wall into the city behind it. Use any tactics you want, just make sure you cripple the enemy in any way, either in morale, spirit or physically. The red-eyed Kunoichi smirked. Any tactics I want, eh? She asked, licking her lips as her eyes gleamed. Hinata's eyes narrowed. She had experienced firsthand how off the Kiri Kunoichi was. She hoped she was making the right choice. It was with great reluctance that she nodded. Lady Hyuga, if I may. Toshiro spoke from his place in the tent with a respective bow as he extended his hand for the pointer stick Hinata held. She nodded as she handed it to him. The younger Kiri ninja then gestured to some areas within the city. His voice was deep but still held the hint of youth within it. I believe that, once we are inside of the city, there are 3 key locations which we should attempt to strike or altogether eliminate. He paused as he circled 3 areas of the city. From the intelligence received, these areas house the armory, the barracks and one of the supply depots for this section of the city. If we strike at these 3 areas, it will no doubt weaken our enemy, both physically and mentally, should we fail in taking the city in this attack. Why should we destroy them? Once we've breached the wall, this section of the city is practically ours. We could use these facilities. Lee questioned as he thought over the proposal. Toshiro nodded in consent. I would agree, but thus far the Tsuchikage, Yoshihiro, has proven himself to be a formidable enemy. If he pushes us back later, or even during this attack, his men will have to endure the less than favorable conditions if these facilities are destroyed. Our men already carry camping equipment, knowing that we would have to camp out during the long trip. Most of the Iwanins may not have such equipment, believing they could rely on these facilities while they were defending the city. So then that would mean that the men that would subsequently be defending this section of the city, should they succeed in driving us back, would have to endure sleeping on floors, or cramped in small apartments. Damaged weapons wouldn't be able to be repaired as quickly if they had an armory right available to them, the same with supplies, having to take some from the next section of the city over and so on and so forth. Hinata nodded and was about to speak when the sound of clapping broke through the air. It drew their attention to the tent's entrance as the ever-imposing Guan and the copy ninja stepped through. Impressive, your strategic skills have grown, Hyuga-san, Toshiro. Kakashi-senpai. Lord Guan. Father, with the cries of mild surprise from the others. Kakashi gave his eye smile as he waved. Hey, sorry we're late, we got lost on the road of life. Guan snorted, half in irritation, half in impatience. He looked to the younger ninja as he spoke. Very well, you 3 carry out your plan. Kakashi and I will hang back so as not to get sucked into it. Our mission is to defeat this Yoshihiro Shimazu. When someone has seen him and has definite confirmation, send another signal. We'll move in to deal with him so your units may continue with their mission. Is this understood? Hinata and the others nodded. Seeing everyone in agreement, Hinata spoke. Very well then, the attack will begin tomorrow morning. The morning sun was greeted by battle cries and explosions as it rose high above what was now another day in the city of Sakai. As instructed, Lee and Toshiro's unit had battered the northern wall with everything they had. Even so, Iwa was holding on, forcing them to bleed for every inch of ground they gained. Leesler as a taijutsu master truly shined through as his form was visible for a scant few seconds in which he was delivering vicious, and often brutal blows that shattered bones and snapped necks. His feet barely touching the ground for more than a brief second as he dodged and blocked kunai and shuriken with ease before appearing in front of the ninja and systematically disabling him. The gasps barely escaped their lips before they were almost instantly killed and or tossed into a world of blinding pain as their knees or their arms were broken in several places. Toshiro too showed his skills, but in a different way. Whereas Lee would dodge the attacks sent at him before he countered with his own, Toshiro simply shrugged them off. Whether they be kunai or shuriken, they simply bounced off the heavy armor that covered his form. Strangely, while it did seem heavy, the young Kiri ninja moved like it weighed nothing and could easily keep up with most of the Iwa ninja that tried to attack him. He showed his mastery of the twin axes he carried with him as he hacked off limbs with single swings or crushed skulls with the dull side of them, the sickening cracks not even making the younger man wince before he moved on to his next victim. Together the 2 distinct styles of combat kept the Iwa ninja off balance as Lee and Toshiro continuously switched positions to confuse or surprise the enemy. From his temporary HQ, Yoshihiro watched as Konoha nins began to push back the Iwa nins along the northern side of the wall. He could tell this was not the main attack force, their numbers were too few and their aggressiveness too staged. Still, most of his men were beginning to get anxious. Having to watch your comrades get injured and killed was never easy, especially when you were just a little ways away. Yoshihiro-sama. One of his Junin captains called to him. Please sir, they're getting slaughtered out there, let us go help them. The man pleaded, his features torn, as if he was struggling not to go over there himself. To hell with his permission. Yoshihiro sighed. While he admired the boy's bravery and loyalty to his comrades, he did not admire the boy's rashness. Still, he had to keep his men's morale high. Doing that meant keeping a delicate balance of complying with his men's wishes and doing what was tactically best. At this point he had to go with the former. If his men didn't think he cared about them, which he did, they would not fight for him, at least not as much as they would if they knew he cared for them. So for now, he would indulge them. All right, he sighed before looking at the Konoha ninja a ways behind him, each of them looking anxious and angry. Standing up, he made his way towards them. They froze for a moment before straightening up and bowing their heads in respect for their superior in both skill and rank. Yoshihiro looked each of them over before he finally spoke. All right, kids, you're under my control for now, so I want you three, he said, gesturing to Ino, Chuji and Shikamaru, to head along to the northern wall with the reinforcement units. The three nodded before they left, sparing silent glances at their comrades as they left. As his men and temporary allies left, Yoshihiro allowed his eyes to travel over to the rest of the defensive structures. All right, brats, I'll play your game. As the axe in Toshiro's left hand split the skull of another Iwa ninja, he spared a glance down to the courtyard where he saw that finally more ninja were coming to aid their comrades. Turning quickly, he deflected a kunai before throwing his axe in retaliation, catching the ninja in the chest with enough force to send him falling over the wall. Rushing over to the edge of the wall opposite the Iwa ninja, he took out a green smoke bomb which he quickly tossed over the wall, the trail of green smoke rising high above them. Konoha Senpu, was the cry he heard behind him. Spinning around, he caught sight of Lee as the taijutsu master delivered a brutal spin kick to another ninja's face, snapping his neck and sending him crashing into his comrades, knocking a few of them off the wall. Catching sight of another ninja getting ready to throw either a kunai or shuriken at Lee, he threw his other axe, catching the man in the temple with a sickening crunch. Blood and brain matter splattering the floor beneath him in a gruesome display. Lee continued to pound away at his opponents, easily taking them down. He gave pause, however, as he caught sight of a small black tendril approaching him from the ground. Curious, but not curious enough to let it approach him, the taijutsu master leapt back. To his surprise, however, the black tendril continued to follow his form, or his shadow. Recalling what Guy had said at one point about Konoha's clans, he recalled the Nara's ability. He also recalled some of the reports from the scouts that Iwa ninjas had been seen using Konoha techniques against them. Thinking fast, Lee grabbed a flash bomb from his pouch. Revealing light, he called out the code word to warn all nearby allies of what he was about to use. Then he threw it towards the enemy ranks, as far away from his men as possible. A massive flash and deafening noise tore through the air around them. Lee's ears were ringing and he could scarcely see the faint outlines of people in the distance. This was why these were not used more often. They were very disorienting, and sometimes even those with warning could end up blinded or deaf for minutes at a time, and for a ninja that was deadly. Still, the taijutsu user had enough sense to look back at the receding shadow and follow it to the user who stood a few feet away, clutching his bleeding ears as tears leaked from his eyes. Though he felt as if the bones in his legs were toothpicks, Lee still made his way over to the shadow user and delivered a brutal kick to the downed man's ribs. He would have continued his assault had it not been for the massive fist that smashed into his side at the moment, nearly sending him over the wall had it not been for his reflex to grab the ledge. Chuji, though, too was feeling the crippling effects of the flash bomb, but he luckily had managed to open his eyes long enough to catch sight of the ninja that had attacked his best friend and lashed out in retaliation. He felt his fist hit something and hoped it was the attacking ninja. Opening his eyes again, he could faintly see the ninja trying to lift himself up from the ledge of the wall. Not wanting to give the man a chance to do so, the large ninja picked himself up and made his way over in order to kick him off or something. Before he was halfway there, however, something crashed into his back, sending both him, and whoever had crashed into him, over the wall. Passing right by Lee, the taijutsu user could only stare in mild confusion as two blurry figures flashed past him and fell to the floor below. Picking himself up, he managed to catch sight of the shadow wielder again as he stood, being helped up by a blonde-haired kunoichi. Judging from her appearance, she was far enough away from the flashbang to have not been affected too severely. Taking a moment to regain his bearings, Lee finally managed to get the ringing out of his ears and clear the blurriness from his vision. He shook his head and saw that the shadow-using ninja had apparently regained his bearings, and now both he and the blonde-haired girl were taking up their stances to fight him. Remembering what he had heard, the shadow techniques went with the Yamanaka's mind techniques and the Akamiki's body-enlarging strength techniques. So judging by their looks, the girl was a Yamanaka and the one that had hit him was an Akamiki. All of these techniques were relatively slow, so if he could just keep himself moving fast, he would hopefully be able to eliminate them. Well, it was worth a shot. Lee took his stance and with a blur of movement was already upon them. Meanwhile down below Toshiro, who had tackled Chuji when he saw him approaching Lee, could only groan in pain as he picked himself off the floor. He was not affected that badly by the flashbang since he had been far away, but if the flashbang didn't cripple his senses, the fall had certainly crippled him. That was a 70-foot drop, and even with ninja training that was a leap. Landing on his feet wouldn't have been so bad, but he hadn't landed on his feet. Luckily he was able to use chakra on his armor to absorb the blow. But it still hurt. Picking himself up, he stole a glance at the large man he had tackled only to find him in a similar situation of getting to his feet. Luckily, some of his Kiri ninja had seen him fall and had pushed their way past many of the still stunned Iwa nins in order to make it to him. Spreading the fight down the wall into the courtyard. Straightening up, he stood to his full height of 5'10" and turned to face the ninja he had tackled. Only to find himself staring up at Chuji's imposing height of 6'1", 6'3" with the extra bulk of his body armor. Toshiro had the good sense to keep his sudden trepidation from his face. Okay then. The ninja along the central wall, distracted by the battle taking place so close by, never noticed the extra force of Konoha ninja as they crept silently up the wall, hidden by a mass genjutsu. Hinata's Byakugan flared to life, sending out a pulse of chakra, dispersing her part of the genjutsu. Shortly after, others holding the genjutsu dropped theirs before the ninja leapt over the wall with a battle cry, catching the unsuspecting ninja by surprise as they cut him down without mercy. Blood splattered the cold, stone floor at their feet as throats and arteries were slashed. Kunai rained down from the guard towers, killing more Konoha ninja as the thrown projectiles were tossed with pinpoint accuracy. Hinata, however, continued to push forward. She showed just why she was the Hyuga clan head. She would continually switch between Juoken strikes, and catching weapons aimed at her and using them to catch her opponent by surprise. Easily twisting and contorting her body expertly to avoid both incoming projectiles and physical strikes from the opponents in front of her before countering with her own quick, devastating attacks. The chakra in her palm was like a piercing, thin knife, injuring the heart, kidneys, lungs and other important vital organs with nothing but light taps as she seemed to flow like water between her attackers. Yoshihiro smirked as he could faintly see the silhouette of the Hyuga girl he had fought before, above the central wall. Well, she was certainly skilled, even though she was too much of a rookie to really go against him one-on-one. Give her a few more years. Still, if he didn't do something now, then it looked like she really would break through the central group with relative ease, something he couldn't allow. Looking around, he decided that he didn't want to really send out another unit from the reserves, seeing as how he only had one left since he had sent out two to the northern wall. Alright then, he contemplated before he looked back at the Suna ninja. Okay dog boy, Pinky and Blondie, he said, making Kiba, Sakura and Temari bristle in anger, though they kept their tongues to themselves as they approached. Alright brats. He peered into the distance, pointing at the white-clad form of Hinata. Ya, see that girl over there? Aren't you a bit old for her? Kiba shot back only to get an elbow to the gut, which knocked the air knocked out of his lungs as Akamaru growled his disapproval of his master's impertinence, though he could faintly hear Kiba chuckling at having gotten one over the old man. Yoshihiro rolled his eyes as he pointed again. She's the enemy commander. Take her out and the enemy morale will collapse and they'll be easily pushed back. That's your job. 3 of us against 1 woman. Isn't that a little much? Temari questioned, somewhat insulted at the insinuation that she was weak. Yeah, well, I fought her before, she's tough. And this time she'll be at the top of her game, for sure. And also, since I don't know your skills that well, a little overkill won't be so bad. Add to that, she's a Hyuga. A Hyuga? Sakura questioned, memories of their old classmate Hinata suddenly returning to her. She had never been close to the girl, but intelligence reports from the investigators shortly after the massacre 9 years ago reported that it was Hinata that had been the one to betray them to the one that had ultimately killed off everyone at the compound. Needless to say, she was held in no high regard amongst the group since then. Kiba was immediately serious as he straightened. Do you know her name? Was it by any chance Hinata or something like that? Yoshihiro paused as he watched the dog boy and the dog girl tense up as their canine companions growled in anger. He knew her name, since his scouts had reported it. But judging by their body language, they would be completely irrational with anger if he said that was her name. So deciding to play it smart, he simply said, I don't know, it was surprisingly difficult to get spies within the camp to gather intelligence. Kiba growled before he rushed off. Kiba. Temari yelled after him only to curse as she whipped out her fan and took to the air, Sakura soon leaping up to join her. That brother of yours is a real hothead, isn't he? The Tsuchikage spoke back to Hana with a lazy shrug. Hana, though also angry, had to agree with the Tsuchikage. Her brother really needed to learn how to control his temper. One of these days it was going to get him into trouble. Kaiten. Hinata yelled. A massive shockwave of chakra soon enveloped the part of the wall she had been standing on, sending nearly a dozen Iwa nin flying as the chitin blew them away. With the Byakugan still activated, she caught sight of two unique sights approaching her fast. A man riding a massive dog and two girls riding a large fan. For a moment she didn't register them in her mind, but then she recognized their features, Inuzuka clan markings and a white, beige dog. An Inuzuka. Here. Well now, this just got interesting. She thought before she reached into her robes and pulled out a red smoke bomb. Throwing it over the wall, she then turned back to the approaching ninja, who seemed quite fixated on her if the direction of their eyes was anything to go by. Yoshihiro continued to overlook the ongoing battle from his temporary HQ when his senses caught something. Smirking, he looked to the last of his commanders. Take your men to the wall, Inuzuka girl, south mind you. That's probably where the next wave is coming from. Hana looked at the older man a little strangely and was about to protest when an explosion rocked the southern wall, indicating that indeed the next attack was coming from there. She rushed off, her three dogs following shortly after her. As soon as everyone left, Yoshihiro allowed the smirk on his features to widen. Well, you two must indeed be skilled, considering you were able to get in here without anyone noticing. The two guards who stood at the entrance of the room behind him were suddenly enveloped in a puff of smoke, revealing the copy ninja Kakashi and the former member of the Seven Swordsmen, Guan. Taking out 6 kunai, Kakashi threw them to the four corners of the room, and the center of the floor and ceiling. They glowed purple for a brief moment before a purple barrier was suddenly erected around the room. It was similar to the Sound Force technique, only difference was that this had a time limit of about 20 minutes, and if one of the kunai were destroyed, the whole barrier would fall apart. Still, hopefully 20 minutes would be enough to deal with Yoshihiro, or at least weaken him between the two of them. Well now, Yoshihiro spoke as he stood from his seat and turned around. My name is Yoshihiro Shimazu, otherwise known as Devil Shimazu. Who will I be facing today? The older man questioned with a grin as he hefted his hammer onto his shoulder, smirking at them. Looks like the brat had decided to send some, not so wet behind the ears Junin to face him this time. Copy ninja, Sharingan no Kakashi. Second in command of the Seven Swordsmen, Green Dragon of Kiriguan. Yoshihiro's smirk only widened. This was a fight he was definitely going to enjoy. Who knows, maybe this time he'd have to actually use his clan's signature technique. Meanwhile, somewhere within Lightning Country, two men wearing cloaks with red clouds were sitting around the campfire. One had bleached blonde, almost silvery hair with a three-bladed scythe on his back. The other was rather tall, standing at 6 feet 8 with a cowl covering his lower features as well as a headpiece which covered the rest of his head, leaving only his eyes visible, which were somewhat beady and white around the iris. Geez, how long is this gonna take? We've been skirting around this place for nearly the past month. This is getting real and annoying. I say we should just go in now and in. Quiet, his partner snapped. We'll make our move when Pain commands us, no sooner, no later. The silver-haired man snarled in anger but kept his silence. Hopefully the leader would contact them soon. If not, well, let's just say it wouldn't be pretty. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.